Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Success. Brandon Walsh stood on the 42nd floor of his Manhattan office, gazing down at the city that had made him rich beyond his wildest dreams. At 45, he commanded an empire built from nothing, a network of luxury hotels across the East Coast that had transformed him from a small-town construction worker into one of New York's most formidable businessmen. The scar running along his left forearm served as a permanent reminder of his humble beginnings. 20 years ago, he'd been laying concrete foundations in brutal summer heat, dreaming of something greater. Now, his calloused hands signed contracts worth millions, and his steel-gray eyes had earned him a reputation as a man who never forgot a favor or a slight. "Mr. Walsh," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mrs. Walsh is here to see you." Brandon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Crystal rarely visited his office unless she wanted something expensive. Their marriage had become a carefully choreographed dance of mutual tolerance, sustained by his wealth and her stunning beauty. She'd been a cocktail waitress at his first hotel when they met, blonde, ambitious, and 22 to his 32. Now, at 37, she maintained her appearance with the dedication of a professional athlete, though the warmth in her blue eyes had long since faded. Crystal glided into his office wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and as cold as winter morning. "Darling," she purred, kissing his cheek with lips that felt like ice. "I have wonderful news. Amber finally found the perfect house." Their 20-year-old daughter had been house hunting for months, supposedly preparing for her independence after college. Brandon had indulged this search, hoping it might mature her beyond the spoiled princess Crystal had raised her to be. "Where?" Brandon asked, settling behind his mahogany desk. "The Hamptons. It's absolutely perfect. 6 bedrooms, oceanfront, with a private beach. The seller is motivated, but they want cash. $7 million. Brandon studied his wife's face, noting the barely contained excitement she tried to mask as maternal concern. Something felt wrong. Amber had never shown interest in property investment before, preferring shopping sprees and social media to substantive pursuits. "That's quite a leap from starter home to Hampton's estate," he said carefully. Crystal's laugh tinkled like broken glass. "Our daughter deserves the best. Besides, it's an investment. Property values there only go up." Brandon had built his fortune on reading people, understanding their motivations, their weaknesses. Crystal's tells were subtle but familiar. The slight dilation of her pupils when she lied, the way her manicured fingers drummed against her purse when she was nervous. "I'll need to see the property first," he said. "Oh, but the seller needs an answer by Friday. These Hamptons properties don't stay on the market long." Her voice carried a hint of desperation poorly disguised as urgency. Brandon leaned back in his leather chair, studying the woman he'd shared a bed with for 15 years. She'd given him one child and taken everything he'd offered, but lately, he'd sensed a distance growing between them that went beyond their usual emotional coolness. $7 million is a significant sum, even for us. "Brandon, please. Think of Amber's future. This could set her up for life." The way she said Amber's name carried an odd weight, as if she were playing a card she expected to win the game. Brandon had learned long ago that when someone invoked family to justify a financial decision, they were usually lying about their true motivations. "I'll consider it," he said finally. Crystal's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Of course, but don't take too long, darling. Opportunities like this don't wait." After she left, Brandon sat in the gathering dusk of his office, watching the city lights flicker to life below. His instincts, honed by years of cutthroat business dealings, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong with Crystal's sudden real estate urgency. He picked up his phone and dialed his private investigator, a former NYPD detective named Rico Valdez who'd helped him navigate various business complications over the years. "Rico, it's Brandon. I need you to look into something for me. Quietly." Chapter 2. Shadows and Secrets. Rico Valdez had been tracking cheating spouses and corporate espionage for 12 years since leaving the force, but Brandon Walsh's case felt different. The man who'd hired him wasn't some insecure husband looking for confirmation of his worst fears. Brandon was a predator sensing prey. 3 days of surveillance revealed a pattern that made Rico's blood run cold. Crystal Walsh wasn't just having an affair. She was orchestrating something far more elaborate. The man was Troy Hendricks, 38, a failed real estate developer who'd filed bankruptcy twice in the past decade. Handsome in a weathered, dangerous way, with the kind of smile that convinced women to ignore red flags. He and Crystal met twice daily, once at a downtown cafe, once at a motel on the outskirts of the city where they conducted business that looked nothing like romance. Rico had photographed them poring over documents, making phone calls, and meeting with a third party that made his investigator instinct scream warnings. Vincent "Vinny" Torino, a known associate of several crime families who specialized in money laundering and identity theft. The most damning evidence came from a parabolic microphone recording outside the motel room. Crystal's voice, stripped of its usual honey-sweet tone, revealed a woman Rico barely recognized. "The stupid bastard will hand over the money if we play this right," she'd said, laughing with cruel satisfaction. 15 years of playing the devoted wife, and it all pays off this weekend. Troy's response chilled Rico to the bone. And the daughter's really on board with this? Amber hates him almost as much as I do. She thinks he's a controlling monster who's suffocated us both. Besides, she gets half the money, and we all disappear together. New identities, new lives, far away from Brandon's reach. You sure he won't suspect? Please. The man thinks he's bought my loyalty with jewelry and credit cards. He has no idea I've been planning this for 3 years. Rico delivered his report to Brandon on Friday morning. Watching his client's face transform from suspicious concern to something far more dangerous. The man who'd built an empire through ruthless determination didn't even blink as he reviewed the photographs and transcripts. They're planning to take the money and run, Rico concluded. Probably this weekend, based on their conversations. They've got new identities lined up, offshore accounts prepared. This is an amateur hour, Mr. Walsh. They've been planning this meticulously. Brandon set down the photos with steady hands, but Rico caught the slight tremor in his voice when he spoke. My daughter, she's meeting them tonight. From what I can tell, your wife's convinced her that you're emotionally abusive, that you control them through money. Amber believes she's helping her mother escape an oppressive marriage. The silence that followed felt like the moments before an explosion. Brandon stared out his office window, and Rico saw something shifting behind those steel-gray eyes, something primal and unforgiving. They want $7 million, Brandon said finally. They'll get exactly what they deserve. Rico had seen that look before, in interrogation rooms with suspects who'd pushed too far past the line of human decency. Mr. Walsh, whatever you're thinking, I need you to do something else for me. Rico, can you arrange for a large bag to be filled with something that looks like cash bundles from a distance? What kind of something? Brandon's smile was the coldest thing Rico had ever seen. Newspaper, cut to size, wrapped in genuine $100 bills on the outside of each bundle. Maybe $200,000 in real money spread throughout, just enough to feel authentic. That's not illegal, and I need you to install cameras in my daughter's apartment. Every room. I want to record everything that happens when they discover what's really in that bag. Rico felt a chill crawl up his spine. He'd worked for men who destroyed lives in boardrooms and back alleys. But Brandon Walsh was planning something that went beyond simple revenge. Mr. Walsh, maybe you should consider calling the police. What they're planning is fraud, theft. Brandon's laugh contained no humor whatsoever. The police would arrest them, they'd serve a few years, and then they'd be free to try again. No, Rico. Some betrayals require a more permanent solution. As Rico left the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed the moment a dangerous man decided to become something far worse. Chapter 3. The Perfect Trap. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only autumn in New York could provide. Brandon stood in his daughter's apartment, watching Amber's nervous energy as she fidgeted with the expensive safe he'd bought her for her 20th birthday, a safe that was about to become the center of his carefully orchestrated revenge. "Are you sure about this, Daddy?" Amber asked, her voice carrying the same manipulative sweetness her mother had perfected. "I mean, keeping that much cash here seems risky." Brandon studied his daughter's face, seeing Crystal's features reflected in her bone structure, but also recognizing his own steel-gray eyes. Those eyes that had once looked at him with genuine affection now held something calculated and cold. The realization that his own child had been turned against him sent a rage through his system that he struggled to contain. "The bank won't be open until Monday, sweetheart. The seller needs cash by Sunday evening, or they're walking away from a deal. Sometimes we have to take calculated risks to secure our future." The irony of his words wasn't lost on him. Amber was indeed securing her future, just not the one she imagined. He placed the heavy duffel bag into the safe, noting how Amber's eyes tracked its movement with barely concealed greed. Rico's team had done excellent work. The bag felt authentic, weighed properly, and even had the slight chemical smell of genuine currency. $6 million, Brandon said, making his voice sound appropriately anxious. "Everything we've saved for your future, Amber. I trust you to keep it safe." She hugged him then, and for a moment, Brandon felt a flicker of the love he'd once held for his little girl. But her embrace felt rehearsed, calculated, another performance in the elaborate play his wife had choreographed. "I won't let you down, Daddy." "I know you won't," he replied, and in a way that was absolutely true. After leaving Amber's apartment, Brandon drove to his private estate in Westchester, where Rico was waiting with final preparations. Hidden cameras now monitored every angle of Amber's apartment, streaming live footage to servers that Rico assured him were completely untraceable. "They're moving tonight," Rico reported. "My sources say they've got a charter flight leaving from Teterboro at midnight, heading for the Cayman Islands. From there, they disappear into new identities." Brandon nodded, settling into his home office where multiple screens showed him different angles of his daughter's empty apartment. "And the other arrangements?" "Everything's in place. The moment they discover what's really in that bag, they'll have a choice to make. Either they run with 200,000 and try to rebuild their lives, or they come back for real money and walk into the trap I've prepared." Rico shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Walsh, I have to ask, how far are you planning to take this?" Brandon's smile was razor-sharp, far enough to ensure they never betray anyone again. As evening fell, the cameras showed Crystal arriving at Amber's apartment with Troy in tow. Brandon watched his wife's performance with detached fascination as she hugged their daughter and spoke in animated whispers about their impending freedom. Troy looked exactly like the kind of man who convinced wealthy women to abandon their marriages. Charming, confident, and radiating the dangerous appeal of someone unbound by conventional morality. He was also, according to Rico's research, a man with significant gambling debts and connections to people who collected those debts with extreme prejudice. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Amber's voice came through the hidden microphones clearly. "I mean, Daddy's been good to us." "Good to us." Crystal's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Sweetheart, your father is a controlling monster who's kept us trapped in a golden cage for 15 years. Tonight, we finally get our freedom." Brandon watched Troy nod encouragingly, his arms sliding around Crystal's waist with possessive familiarity. The casual intimacy of their body language suggested their affair had been going on for far longer than Rico's 3-day surveillance had revealed. "Besides," Crystal continued, "we're not stealing anything. I've earned this money through 15 years of playing the perfect wife to a man who treats me like an expensive accessory." The words hit Brandon like physical blows, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the depth of his wife's self-deception. She genuinely believed she was entitled to his life's work because she'd managed to maintain her beauty and smile at dinner parties. At 11:30 p.m., they made their move. Brandon watched through the cameras as they opened the safe with shaking hands, removed the heavy duffel bag, and hurried toward the waiting car that would take them to their charter flight. In exactly 12 hours, they would discover the truth about what they'd stolen. And then, Brandon's real revenge would begin. Chapter 4. The Discovery. The luxury suite in Georgetown, Cayman Islands, cost $8,000 per night, but Troy Hendricks felt like a king as he carried the duffel bag across the marble floor. Crystal sprawled across the king-sized bed in a silk negligee, while Amber stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the turquoise Caribbean waters. "I can't believe we actually did it," Amber whispered, her voice filled with exhilarated disbelief. "I keep expecting Daddy to burst through the door." Crystal's laugh was intoxicating with freedom. "Your father has no idea where we are, sweetheart. By the time he realizes we're gone, we'll have new names, new lives, and enough money to disappear forever." Troy set the bag on the marble coffee table with ceremonial reverence. $6 million. Split 3 ways, that's $2 million each, enough to live like royalty for the rest of our lives. The moment felt sacred, triumphant. They'd escaped Brandon Walsh's control, outsmarted one of New York's most ruthless businessmen, and claimed their prize. Crystal's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the zipper. "To our new lives," she said, pulling the zipper back to reveal newspaper. Bundles and bundles of newspaper, cut to the exact size of currency and wrapped with genuine $100 bills on the outside. Crystal's hands dove deeper into the bag, frantically searching for real money, finding only more newspaper and a single envelope tucked between the fake bundles. "What the hell?" Troy snatched the bag, dumping its contents across the coffee table. Real money scattered among the newspaper. Maybe $200,000 total, barely enough to cover their escape expenses. Amber's scream echoed through the suite. "No, no, no. This can't be right. You put $6 million in that safe." Crystal tore open the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note in Brandon's familiar, precise script. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice my wife's sudden interest in real estate? Or my daughter's newfound affection? The money you tried to steal represents 20 years of my blood, sweat, and sacrifice. You wanted to betray me? Let's see how you handle the consequences. You have 48 hours to return to New York and face me. If you run, I will find you. If you hide, I will drag you out. There is nowhere on this earth you can go that my reach won't follow. The choice is yours. Come back and accept your punishment, or spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders. You taught me that family means nothing. Now let me teach you what that really costs." Brandon. The photograph showed the 3 of them at the airport, taken just hours earlier. But it wasn't the image that made Crystal's blood turn to ice. It was the red circles drawn around each of their faces, and the handwritten notation in the corner. "Vincent Torino sends his regards." Troy went white as a sheet. What does he know about Vinny? "Who's Vincent Torino?" Amber demanded, but the terror in Troy's eyes told her everything she needed to know. Crystal sank onto the bed, the full scope of their situation crashing down on her like a collapsing building. Brandon hadn't just anticipated their betrayal. He'd orchestrated their downfall. Every step they'd taken, every plan they'd made, he'd been 3 moves ahead. "We have to run," Troy said, his earlier confidence evaporating. "We take the 200,000 and disappear. Change our names, go somewhere he can't find us." "You don't understand," Crystal whispered, her voice hollow with defeat. "There is nowhere he can't find us. Brandon doesn't just have money. He has connections, resources, people who owe him favors, and others who fear him." Amber collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "What have we done? What have we done?" Outside their suite, the tropical paradise that had seemed like freedom an hour ago now felt like a beautiful prison. Brandon Walsh had given them a choice, but Crystal understood the truth. They were already caught in a trap that had been 20 years in the making. The only question now was whether they would walk back into his web willingly or be dragged back to face whatever punishment he'd designed for their betrayal. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. Brandon's private jet touched down at Cayman Islands International Airport 18 hours after Crystal and Troy's discovery. He stepped onto the tarmac wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's cars, his steel-gray eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses that reflected the Caribbean sun like mirrors. Rico emerged from the plane behind him, carrying a briefcase and wearing the grim expression of a man who'd seen where Brandon's revenge was heading. The past 24 hours had transformed his employer from a betrayed husband into something far more dangerous, a predator who'd tasted blood and found he liked it. "They're still in the hotel," Rico reported as they settled into the waiting black sedan. "My sources say they've been arguing for hours. The girl wants to come home and beg for forgiveness. The wife wants to run. The boyfriend's caught between his gambling debts and his fear of you." Brandon's smile held no warmth. Fear is a useful emotion. It clarifies priorities. The sedan glided through Georgetown's narrow streets, past colonial buildings painted in cheerful pastels that seemed to mock the darkness of Brandon's intentions. He'd spent the flight planning the next phase of his revenge, making phone calls to associates who owed him favors, setting wheels in motion that would give his betrayers exactly the choices they deserved. "Vincent Torino's people are already on the island," Rico continued reluctantly. "They arrived this morning. Whatever arrangement you made with him." "Vincent understands business," Brandon interrupted. "Troy owes him $3 million in gambling debts. I've offered to cover those debts in exchange for services. Everyone wins." Rico had worked for dangerous men before, but Brandon's casual mention of covering $3 million in crime family debts sent chills through him. The man who'd hired him to investigate a cheating wife had revealed himself to be something far more lethal. And if they choose to run instead of coming back to New York? Brandon's reflection in the sedan window looked like a predator evaluating prey. Then they'll learn that some hunts are more entertaining than others. At the hotel, Vincent Torino's men had taken positions throughout the building, not to harm Crystal, Troy, and Amber, but to ensure they understood the scope of their situation. Every exit was watched, every escape route monitored. The luxury suite that had felt like paradise yesterday now served as an elegant prison. Brandon entered the hotel lobby like a conquering emperor returning to claim his territory. The staff, alerted to his arrival by generous advance payments, treated him with the reverence reserved for men who could buy and sell their establishment without checking their bank balance. He settled into the penthouse suite directly above the room where his wife, daughter, and their accomplice were trapped, then sent a simple message through the hotel's internal phone system. "Room service is on its way." 30 minutes later, a hotel attendant knocked on Crystal's door with a silver cart carrying their lunch, but instead of food, the covered dishes contained photographs. Pictures of Vincent Torino's men positioned throughout the hotel. Images of Troy's mounting gambling debts and the brutal methods used to collect them. Documentation of Amber's credit cards being canceled, her trust fund frozen, her entire financial existence erased with a few phone calls. And at the bottom of the cart, a single bottle of champagne with another note. "Congratulations on your new freedom. Since you're no longer my family, you're no longer under my protection." Vincent's men are very interested in collecting Troy's debts. "The Cayman authorities have been informed that your passports were reported stolen. And as of this morning, every asset connected to the Walsh name has been legally transferred to charitable foundations. You wanted independence? You have it. Every comfort you've enjoyed, every security you've taken for granted, every safety net that protected you, gone. You have until sunset to decide. Come upstairs and discuss terms for your return to New York, or find out how the world treats people who have nothing and no one to protect them. The choice is still yours. For now, B." Crystal read the note 3 times before the full implications sank in. Brandon hadn't just anticipated their betrayal. He'd used it as an excuse to strip away every comfort, every protection, every advantage their marriage had provided. They weren't just financially ruined. They were completely vulnerable. "He's upstairs," Amber whispered, pointing toward the ceiling. "He's right above us." Troy paced the suite like a caged animal, his earlier confidence replaced by the desperate energy of a man realizing he'd underestimated his opponent. "We could still run. Take the money we have and go where?" Crystal's voice carried the hollow tone of someone watching their world collapse. "He's right. We have nothing without him. No money, no protection, no future." Outside their window, the Caribbean sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, marking the deadline Brandon had set. In a few hours, they would have to choose: surrender to his mercy or discover exactly how merciless the world could be to people who'd lost everything. The hunt was just beginning. Chapter 6: The Terms of Surrender. As the Caribbean sun sank toward the horizon, painting the hotel suite in shades of gold and crimson, Crystal Walsh faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. Troy sat slumped in a chair by the window, his face ashen with the realization that Vincent Torino's men weren't just watching, they were waiting. Amber curled on the bed, sobbing into a pillow that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The phone rang at exactly sunset. Mrs. Walsh. The voice belonged to a hotel concierge, speaking with the practiced neutrality of someone paid to deliver uncomfortable messages. Mr. Walsh requests your presence in the penthouse suite. All three of you. Immediately. Crystal's hand shook as she hung up the phone. For 15 years, she'd played the role of devoted wife while secretly planning her escape. Now, faced with the consequences of her betrayal, she realized how thoroughly she'd underestimated the man she'd married. "We have to go," she whispered. Troy's laugh held the edge of hysteria. "Go up there? Are you insane? He'll kill us. If we don't go up there, Vincent's men will do worse than kill us. At least with Brandon, we know what we're dealing with." They rode the elevator to the penthouse in silence, each lost in their own private terror. When the doors opened, they found Brandon standing on the suite's private balcony, his silhouette framed against the darkening Caribbean sky. He didn't turn around when they entered. "Close the door behind you," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used in business meetings. "Sit down. We have things to discuss." The penthouse suite was 3 times the size of their room, with panoramic windows and furnishings that spoke of wealth beyond imagination. But what made Crystal's blood freeze was the man sitting in the corner. Vincent Torino, whose reputation for violence was legendary even among New York's criminal elite. "Vincent," Brandon said without turning around, "I believe you know Mr. Hendricks." Troy went white as paper. "Mr. Torino, I can explain." "Nothing to explain," Vincent replied in a voice like gravel. "You owe money. You got caught stealing money. Math is simple." Brandon finally turned to face them, and Crystal saw something in his eyes that made her want to run screaming from the room. This wasn't the man she'd married, or even the ruthless businessman who'd built his empire through calculated aggression. This was something far more dangerous, a predator who'd been betrayed by his own pack. "Sit," he repeated. They obeyed like trained animals. 15 years, Brandon began, his voice conversational. 15 years of marriage, Crystal. 15 years of providing you with everything you could want. A beautiful home, financial security, social status, respect. And this is how you repay me. "Brandon, please," Crystal started. "I'm not finished." His voice cut through her words like a blade. "And you, Amber. 20 years of love, protection, education, opportunity. I've given you every advantage life can offer. This is your gratitude." Amber's sobbing intensified, but Brandon showed no mercy. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued. "Crystal, you're going to sign divorce papers that leave you with nothing. No alimony, no property settlement, no claims to any asset connected to my name. You'll walk away with exactly what you brought to this marriage. Nothing." Crystal opened her mouth to protest, but Brandon held up a hand. "Amber, your trust fund is gone. Your credit cards are canceled. Your college tuition stops immediately. If you want to finish your education, you'll work for it like everyone else. Daddy, please. I'm not your daddy anymore. Family doesn't betray family. Since you've chosen not to be my family, you no longer get the benefits of that relationship." Troy found his voice, desperation making him brave. "And me?" Brandon smiled, and Vincent chuckled darkly from the corner. "You, Troy, have $3 million in gambling debts." Vincent's been very patient, but patience has limits. "However, I made him an offer. I'll cover your debts, all of them, in exchange for your services." "What kind of services?" "The kind that ensure Crystal and Amber understand the permanent nature of consequences." "You wanted to steal from me? Fine. Now you work for me. Indefinitely." The trap's final jaw was closing, and Crystal could see their complete destruction mapped out before them. Brandon hadn't just anticipated their betrayal. He'd used it to design a punishment more brutal than anything legal justice could provide. "You can't do this," Crystal whispered. Brandon's laugh was the coldest sound she'd ever heard. "I can do whatever I want. You taught me that love is worthless, that family is meaningless, that loyalty can be bought and sold. Congratulations, you've created a monster." Outside the penthouse windows, the Caribbean night had fallen completely, and with it, any hope of escape. Brandon Walsh had given them their choices, and now they would live with the consequences forever. Chapter 7. The Price of Betrayal. 6 months later, Crystal Walsh, now Crystal Henderson, having been forced to take her maiden name, stood in the cramped kitchen of a studio apartment in Queens, staring at a stack of bills she couldn't pay. The manicured hands that had once worn $20,000 jewelry now bore calluses from her job at a discount clothing store, where she earned in a week what she used to spend on a single lunch. The divorce had been swift and merciless. Brandon's lawyers, armed with evidence of her adultery and theft attempt, had destroyed her in court. The judge, clearly influenced by Brandon's reputation and connections, had granted him everything while leaving her with nothing, not even the right to use his name. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a woman who'd aged years and months. The stress of poverty, the humiliation of her circumstances, and the constant fear of Vincent Torino's men had carved lines around her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. The designer clothes were long gone, sold to pay for basic necessities. The worst part wasn't the financial destruction, it was the isolation. Every friend from her previous life had abandoned her the moment Brandon made it clear that maintaining relationships with his ex-wife would be inadvisable. The social circle that had once revolved around her wealth and status treated her like a contagious disease. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she'd learned to dread. "Rent inspection tomorrow. Don't be late." Management. Management was Troy, and this wasn't really about rent inspection. 3 blocks away, in a warehouse that Vincent Torino used for various business purposes, Troy Hendricks sat across from Brandon Walsh, reviewing reports that detailed every aspect of Crystal and Amber's new lives. The man who'd once charmed wealthy women now looked like a beaten dog, his expensive clothes replaced by off-the-rack suits, and his confident smile replaced by permanent anxiety. "Crystal's behind on rent again," Troy reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's working 60 hours a week, but it's barely enough to cover basic expenses." Brandon nodded, making notes in a leather-bound journal. "And Amber dropped out of college after 3 weeks. She's working at a fast food restaurant, living in a shared apartment with 3 roommates. She cries herself to sleep most nights." "Good." Brandon's voice held no emotion. "Continue monitoring them. I want to know every struggle, every humiliation, every moment they realize what they've lost." Troy's hands shook slightly as he turned the page in his report. 6 months of working for Brandon had shown him depths of cruelty he'd never imagined. The man didn't just want revenge. He wanted to watch his betrayers suffer slowly, completely, permanently. "Mr. Walsh, they've learned their lesson. Maybe it's time to what?" Brandon's steel-gray eyes fixed on Troy with predatory intensity. "Show mercy? Forgive and forget?" They had 15 and 20 years respectively to appreciate what they had. Instead, they chose to betray the man who gave them everything. Vincent, who'd been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "Kid's got a point, Brandon. How long you planning to keep this up?" Brandon's smile was razor-sharp. "As long as it takes for them to understand that actions have consequences. They wanted independence? They have it. They wanted freedom from my control? They got it. Now they get to experience what life is like without my protection, my money, my influence." Troy cleared his throat nervously. "Crystal's been asking about reconciliation. She wrote you a letter." Brandon held out his hand, and Troy produced a handwritten note on cheap stationery. Crystal's once elegant penmanship was shaky now, desperate. "Brandon, I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I did, but I'm begging you, not for myself, but for Amber. She's so young, and this life is destroying her. I'll accept any punishment you want to give me, but please don't let our daughter suffer for my mistakes. I was wrong about everything. I was selfish, greedy, and stupid. You gave me a beautiful life, and I threw it away for a fantasy. Please, if you ever love me at all, show mercy to our daughter. Crystal. Brandon read the letter twice, then held it to the flame of a nearby candle, watching it burn to ash. Funny, he said, watching the paper blacken and curl. She calls Amber our daughter now. 6 months ago, she was turning my own child against me. Now that they're both suffering, suddenly she remembers family bonds. Troy and Vincent exchanged glances. Both men had seen Brandon's ruthless business practices, but this level of calculated cruelty was something new. The thing about consequences, Brandon continued, is that they have to be permanent to be meaningful. If I show mercy now, what lesson does that teach? That betrayal is acceptable as long as you apologize afterward? That family bonds only matter when you need something? He stood and walked to the warehouse window, looking out at the city that had made him rich and powerful. They made their choice. Now, they live with it. Forever. Outside in the Queen's apartment, Crystal opened her laptop and began typing another letter she knew would never be answered. While 20 blocks away, Amber stared at her reflection in the employee bathroom of a fast food restaurant, wondering how her life had become so small. The price of betrayal, they were learning, was higher than either of them had ever imagined. Chapter 8. The Final Gambit. 1 year after their failed betrayal, Amber Walsh, now calling herself Amber Henderson to avoid the shame associated with her father's name, sat in a 24-hour laundromat in Queens, watching their single load of clothes tumble in the ancient machine. Her mother dozed fitfully in a plastic chair, exhaustion etched into every line of her once beautiful face. The past 12 months had stripped away every comfort, every security, every assumption about how the world worked. They'd learned that poverty wasn't just about lacking money. It was about being invisible, powerless, and constantly afraid. Crystal's carefully maintained beauty had crumbled under the stress of working multiple low-wage jobs, while Amber's college dreams had evaporated into the harsh reality of survival. But something had changed in Amber over the past few weeks. The crushing despair that had defined her existence was slowly being replaced by something harder, more focused, rage. "Mom," she said quietly, watching Crystal stir in her sleep. "I've been thinking." Crystal opened tired eyes that held none of their former sparkle. "About what, sweetheart?" "About fighting back." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Crystal sat up straighter, sudden alertness replacing her exhaustion. "Amber, no. Whatever you're thinking, he's not God," Amber interrupted, her voice carrying a strength that surprised them both. "He's just a man with money and connections. And every man has weaknesses." Crystal looked around the empty laundromat nervously, as if Brandon's surveillance network extended even here. Over the past year, they'd learned that privacy was another luxury they could no longer afford. Troy's monthly inspection, "He destroyed us completely," Crystal whispered. "We have nothing left to fight with." "We have the truth," Amber said. "And we have something he doesn't expect, the willingness to lose everything because we already have." That night, in their studio apartment, Amber revealed the plan she'd been developing for weeks. It was desperate, dangerous, and probably suicidal, but it was also the first real hope either of them had felt since their Caribbean imprisonment. "Vincent Torino," Amber explained, spreading newspaper clippings across their small table. "He's not Dad's friend. He's his business partner. And according to these articles, he's been under FBI investigation for 3 years." Crystal studied the newspaper reports with growing understanding. "You think Vincent's cooperation with your father is illegal?" "I think Dad's been laundering money through his hotel business for years. And I think Vincent has evidence that could put him in prison for the rest of his life." The plan was elegantly simple. Approach Vincent directly, offer him information about Brandon's private accounts and business practices, and convince him that destroying Brandon would be more profitable than maintaining their partnership. It was also essentially a suicide mission. "Vincent Torino doesn't negotiate with amateurs," Crystal said. "He kills them." "Maybe," Amber replied. "But we're not amateurs anymore. We're women with nothing left to lose, which makes us the most dangerous kind of enemy. Crystal saw something in her daughter's eyes that reminded her of Brandon at his most ruthless, a complete absence of fear when facing impossible odds. The year of poverty and humiliation had burned away Amber's softness, leaving something harder and more focused behind. Even if Vincent listens to us, even if he turns against your father, what makes you think he won't kill us afterward? Amber's smile was cold enough to make Crystal shiver. Because I'm not going to make Mom's mistake. I'm not going to underestimate our opponent or overestimate our own cleverness. I'm going to give Vincent exactly what he wants most, the complete destruction of Brandon Walsh, and make sure he needs us alive to get it. 3 days later, Amber walked into Vincent Torino's social club in Little Italy, carrying a briefcase she'd bought with their last $50 and wearing the only business outfit she owned. The men at the front door tried to turn her away, but she spoke 7 words that guaranteed Vincent's attention. I'm Brandon Walsh's daughter. We need to talk. 20 minutes later, she sat across from the most dangerous man in New York, laying out a proposal that would either destroy her father completely or get her killed in the process. You want to betray the man who betrayed you, Vincent said after hearing her pitch. I respect that. But what makes you think I won't just tell Brandon about this meeting? Amber opened her briefcase and removed a single photograph. Brandon and Vincent shaking hands outside a construction site, with bundles of cash visible on the table between them. Because I have documentation of every dirty deal you've made together for the past 5 years. If something happens to me or my mother, copies of this evidence go to the FBI, the IRS, and the New York Times. Vincent's smile was genuinely impressed. You're more like your father than you know, kid. I'm nothing like him, Amber replied. He destroys people because he can. I'm destroying him because I have to. The game was about to change, and Brandon Walsh had no idea that his greatest mistake wasn't underestimating his enemies. It was creating them in the first place. Chapter 9, Reckoning. The FBI raid on Brandon Walsh's Manhattan headquarters began at dawn, with federal agents swarming through his 42nd floor offices like an army of ants. Brandon sat behind his mahogany desk, hands folded calmly, watching them tear apart the empire he'd spent 20 years building. Special Agent Sarah Chun, the lead investigator, approached his desk with a warrant that represented 3 years of investigation and 1 devastating betrayal. Brandon Walsh, you're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. Brandon's steel-gray eyes remained steady as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. I assume Vincent Torino is enjoying his immunity deal. Mr. Torino has been very cooperative, Agent Chun replied. Amazing how quickly criminal partnerships dissolve when one partner becomes more valuable as a witness. What Brandon didn't know, what Vincent had been careful not to reveal, was that the evidence package hadn't come from Vincent's files. It had come from Amber, who'd spent the past 6 months working as Vincent's inside source, documenting every illegal transaction, every money transfer, every piece of evidence needed to destroy her father completely. As federal agents led Brandon through the lobby of his own building, past gawking employees and news cameras, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing across the street. Amber stood beside a black sedan, no longer the broken girl who'd fled to the Caribbean a year ago, but a woman who'd learned to weaponize her own destruction. Their eyes met through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in over a year, Brandon Walsh felt something approaching respect for his daughter. She'd done what he'd never believed possible. She'd outplayed him. 6 hours later, in federal lockup, Brandon received his first and only visitor. Crystal sat across from him in the visiting room, looking healthier than she had in months. The stress lines around her eyes had softened, and she wore clothes that fit properly for the first time since their divorce. Vincent's taking care of us, she said without preamble. New identities, relocation assistance, enough money to start over. Turns out, cooperating with federal investigations pays better than stealing from husbands. Brandon studied the woman he'd married 15 years ago, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. You planned this from the beginning. No, Crystal replied. Amber planned this. I just followed her lead. Amazing how much your daughter learned from watching you destroy your enemies. And Troy. Crystal's smile held genuine warmth for the first time in years. Troy's dead. Vincent didn't appreciate being used as a pawn in someone else's game. Turns out, betraying multiple crime families is bad for your health. Brandon absorbed this information without emotion. Troy had been a weak link from the beginning, too greedy and too stupid to survive in a world of professional predators. The insurance money alone will keep us comfortable for years, Crystal continued. Plus the federal witness protection stipend, plus Vincent's gratitude payments. We'll never be wealthy again, but we'll never be poor either. And Amber's decided she likes the investigation business. Agent Shin thinks she has a natural talent for it. Something about understanding how criminals think. The irony wasn't lost on Brandon. His daughter had inherited his strategic mind and ruthless determination, then used both to destroy him completely. In a strange way, he was proud of her. One question, he said, the money you tried to steal. You knew it was fake from the beginning, didn't you? Crystal's laugh was genuine and unguarded. We suspected, but Amber convinced Vincent that the real crime wasn't theft. It was that you'd underestimated us. That made him angry enough to listen to our real proposal. Brandon leaned back in his chair, finally understanding the scope of his defeat. They hadn't tried to steal his money. They'd used his own arrogance as bait to trap him in a federal investigation that had been building for years. The bag of newspaper was never about the money, he realized. It was about making me angry enough to reveal my connections to Vincent. Angry people make mistakes, Crystal agreed. And you've been making them for a year, thinking you were punishing us while actually documenting your crimes for federal investigators. As visiting hours ended and Crystal prepared to leave, Brandon felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Complete defeat. Not the temporary setback of a failed business deal, but the absolute destruction of everything he'd built. Any regrets? He asked. Crystal paused at the door, considering the question seriously. I regret the 15 years I wasted being afraid of you. I regret teaching our daughter to fear your anger instead of learning from your methods. But betraying you? No regrets at all. That night, alone in his cell, Brandon Walsh stared at the ceiling and contemplated the elegant perfection of his destruction. His wife and daughter had learned from his own playbook, then used his teachings to orchestrate his downfall. They'd outthought him, outplanned him, and out-ruthlessly executed him. In the end, his greatest weakness hadn't been trusting the wrong people. It had been underestimating the people he'd taught to be just as ruthless as he was. The student had become the master, and the master had learned that in a world without loyalty, even family bonds could be weaponized by those clever enough to forge them. Brandon's empire was gone, his freedom was gone, and his family had disappeared into new identities funded by his enemies. But as he drifted toward sleep in his federal cell, Brandon Walsh found himself smiling. After all, it took a special kind of talent to raise a daughter capable of destroying him so completely. He'd taught her well. Epilogue. 2 years later, FBI Special Agent Amber Chun, her new identity, honoring the agent who'd helped orchestrate her father's downfall, stood in a Manhattan courtroom as the judge sentenced Brandon Walsh to 25 years in federal prison. He looked older, grayer, but his steel-gray eyes still held their predatory intelligence. When the sentence was read, he looked directly at her and nodded once, a gesture of respect between professionals. Crystal, now living quietly in Portland under a new name, ran a small boutique that specialized in helping women rebuild their lives after divorce. She'd found peace in helping others escape the kinds of traps she'd once lived in. Vincent Torino served 18 months in minimum security prison and retired to Florida, where he spent his days fishing and telling stories about the one time he'd been outsmarted by a 20-year-old girl who'd learned strategy from her father and applied it better than he ever had. And Brandon Walsh, the man who'd taught his family that betrayal was unforgivable, discovered that the most perfect revenge was being destroyed by the very lessons he'd taught his enemies. In the end, the price of betrayal wasn't paid by those who'd been betrayed. It was paid by the man who'd made betrayal into an art form, only to discover that his greatest masterpiece was his own destruction. The game was over, and for the first time in her life, Amber Walsh had won. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.